Good morning. This is Robert Kinney.
Good morning. I can see and hear you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good morning. This is Michael Lamb.
Good morning. I can see and hear you as well.
Good morning. Today is Monday, May 6, 2024, and I'm Eric Blank, the chair of the Colorado PUC. This is a commissioner's information meeting and proceeding number 24A-0173E for the Colorado PUC to hear from Xcel Energy Colorado regarding its planned and other outages from April 6th to April 8th. We'll also hear about the experiences of county emergency managers, as well as the results of a recent survey of impacted customers. Before we go any further, can my colleagues introduce themselves?
Good morning, I'm Commissioner Tom Plant.
Good morning, Commissioner Megan Gilman.
Thank you. By way of background, on Wednesday, April 10th, this commission opened an investigation into the outages and asked the company to provide answers to a detailed set of questions and information requests about the company's planning, communication, and real-time actions. The responses to those requests have now been filed in this proceeding. On April 17th, 2024, we heard oral comments from dozens of customers, the public, and other impacted stakeholders about the impacts of these outages. We've also separately received over 700 comments on these events through emails, texts, and other submissions. On April 24th, we set up this information meeting to receive the responses of the company and to hear from county emergency managers and others about their experience and how we might do better. Today's informational meeting is part of the ongoing PUC investigation into the planned outage events, particularly the notice, communication, and coordination issues. And as such, our focus is to hear from the company, the county emergency managers, and customers. At this point in the process, we're primarily here to listen and learn, although we will each have an opportunity to ask questions to the two panels. As such, this information meeting is one component of a larger fact-based, data-driven investigation by the PUC to better understand what happened regarding the planned outage, the key lessons to be learned, and how to start placing the company and Colorado on a path to best national practice in affordably protecting public safety. Ultimately, we expect there will be a comprehensive wildfire mitigation plan application from the company filed in the coming weeks or months, putting forward for our review and potential approval, among other things, a power shutoff program that sets in place the rules and other guardrails surrounding planned outages, notice, and communication provisions, and proposed resiliency investments. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here and to share your comments. This is the first planned outage in Colorado, and right now, at least I have more questions than answers, which is why hearing from the company, emergency planners, customers, and the public is so important. With that, do my colleagues have any comments before we jump into it?
No, I just want to welcome everybody here, and really looking forward to hearing your comments and a description of the events and having a conversation about some of the things that we've heard as well. Thanks.
Commissioner Gilman.
Thank you. No, really just along the lines of Commissioner Plant, welcome to everyone. Happy to see you and very interested to have this dialogue today. Obviously, this is a very important subject of a lot of interest, first of all, in understanding how we protect life and property and maintain safety here in Colorado, but also really maintain the critical services that Public Service Company Colorado provides. So interested to hear more today. Thank you so much for coming with us. Thanks.
With that, Mr. Kenny, would you like to get us started? And then we'll turn it over to our second panel of the emergency managers. Mr. Kenny, to you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Let me first make sure you can hear me well.
We can.
And then second, I understand that the PUC will be running our slides. We do have a few slides to share.
Yes, I have them.
Thank you. Well, let me just say while those are popping up, thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And maybe we can just go to the second slide. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here with you today about the recent high wind event and the steps that we took to help protect public safety and reduce risk of wildfire ignition during that event. What we want to do today is spend some time discussing the lessons that we've learned, which I know is on everybody's mind, that will help us improve how we handle similar situations in the future. We know that our tools for wildfire mitigation will need to continue to evolve, particularly as the threat of wildfires continues to evolve and escalate in Colorado. I'm Robert Kinney. I'm the president of the operating company here in Colorado, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Lamb. And I'll just maybe give Michael an opportunity to introduce himself, and then Michael and I will be tag teaming on the information that we're going to present today.
Thank you, Robert. And just want to echo, I'm super glad to be here to have this conversation with everyone. My role and responsibility at Xcel Energy is for the customer delivery system, so the transmission and distribution electric system and the natural gas systems as well. So I'm intimately involved in designing both operations and the system to provide that critical service that Commissioner Gilman referenced, while also protecting the public.
Slide, please. Thank you. So thank you, Chairman Blank and Commissioner Gilman, Commissioner Plant, Executive Director White, and all the others from the PUC that are on. Thank you all for being here today. Just want to just give a high-level overview of what we would like to cover over the next several minutes. We want to share the detail about our activities related to the windstorm, including the first public safety power shutoff, or PSPS, that we've executed in Colorado. We really want this presentation to help the Commission, our customers, and our communities have confidence that we made the right decisions to protect public safety during this event. This includes sharing details on the severity of the wind event and the damage that it caused to trees and to our power lines in many areas. The magnitude of the windstorm and the damage that it caused underscores our belief that a PSPS did in fact help protect public safety and may have prevented a wildfire. So to that end, our remarks today are going to cover an overview of the event, the operational mitigations that we take, and the criteria, data, and tools that we used in making the decisions to implement those measures. We'll go through the timeline of our customer communications leading up to and during the event. We're going to talk about restoration and the overview of our crew's work to restore power after the event, including the PSPS-related outages, as well as the significant number of outages caused by the high wind itself. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we've learned from that experience and the steps that we're taking to improve our implementation of future PSPS events. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, we want, again, our customers and communities and you all to know that we made the right decision to execute a PSPS. At the same time, we want our customers and our communities to know that PSPS is a tool of last resort to protect public safety when extreme conditions merit it. Also, at the same time, while we did conduct a variety of customer communications before and during the wind event, we know that we have opportunities to improve the timing, frequency, and accuracy of those communications. Last, I think as you alluded to, Chairman Blank, we will be filing in the coming weeks an updated wildfire mitigation plan that will incorporate the learnings from this most recent event, and we look forward to collaborating with the PUC and other key stakeholders as we continue to work to mitigate wildfire risk. Next slide, please. So just as a very broad overview of the event, we're going to start by looking at the weather forecast leading into the event itself, the outages that resulted, including those from PSPS and those caused by the windstorm, and the damage that it caused to our electric system. The National Weather Service office in Boulder issued a red flag warning effective from noon on Saturday to 6 p.m. on Sunday, April 7 for both Boulder and Jefferson counties. With that, wind speeds were anticipated to reach potentially up to 100 miles per hour. And there was also very low relative humidity levels of between 18 and 25%. Taken together, this combination of strong winds, low relative humidity, and warm temperatures are a set of conditions that can contribute to extreme fire risks. The weather forecast also included all the conditions we monitor for high fire risk, and the actual weather that we experienced proved this out and was aligned with that forecast. I do want to underscore that this was far beyond a typical spring storm. In fact, the National Weather Service notes that in the month of April, Winds have exceeded 70 miles per hour in Boulder only 17 times in the past 55 years. And in some parts of our territory, we did see, in fact, 97, 98, 99 mile per hour winds. As we're going to discuss in more detail, as a result of these extreme risks, we initiated a public safety power shutoff beginning Saturday afternoon that affected approximately 52,000 customers. This involved proactively turning off service to about 680 miles of distribution power lines on 24 feeders. Michael's going to explore this more deeply and in depth in a few minutes, expanding on the criteria that we used to implement our wildfire mitigation actions and talking more about how we implemented the PSPS. It's important to note that the vast majority of our outages that we saw over these few days were not as a result solely of the proactive shutoffs, but were in fact caused by the high winds themselves, with a total of about 275,000 customers experiencing outages during the event. Damage to our system was extensive, with crews replacing tens of thousands of pieces of hardware on our poles as they worked to restore our customers' service. Next slide, please. And these are just a few photos that are intended to be illustrative of what we saw. And you can see a few examples of the types of damage that led to the outages and that required significant work from our crews to clear and restore service. Nearly 100 mile per hour winds pushed trees or limbs into our lines and also made accessing some of the areas difficult in the aftermath of the storm as our crews were working to restore power. And through the period of restoration, our crews replaced about 124 power poles, more than 94,000 feet of wire, more than 180 pole cross arms, 34 transformers, and as I mentioned a minute ago, tens of thousands of other pieces of hardware on our poles. We had about 580 crew members that assisted in the restoration, including 85 construction crews and 47 crews that were working to clear trees from lines. And just as an aside, or importantly, we're extremely grateful to them for the work that they were doing around the clock in 16-hour shifts in the days leading up to and following the windstorm. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael Lamb to talk more about how we operated during the event and to give more specificity and particularity to the criteria that we used. And then I'm going to talk about our customer communications. Michael will come back to discuss our restoration process, and then I'll talk about improvements that we're making for future high wind events and high wildfire risk events. Michael?
Thank you, Robert. Next page, please. So I think up front, it's important to create some definition clarity. In our industry, not everyone uses the same terms or defines the terms the same way. So just for purposes of today, I wanted to make sure we were talking by a consistent language. So at the broadest sense, wildfire safety operations is the first step we take when there's elevated risk. And that largely involves turning off the reclose function of breakers and reclosers. So if there's a problem on our system, a breaker opens and doesn't try to reclose in those elevated risk situations. The next step would be to implement wildfire safety settings, which includes also turning off the reclose function of breakers. It also, however, includes changing the sensitivity and the speed of the operation by which those breakers react to issues. So we have used WSO extensively, and we're limited to the use of wildfire safety settings to approximately 8 feeders where we have pilots ongoing in Colorado. WSS involves additional infrastructure that doesn't exist everywhere on our system. And of course, PSPS is the tool of last resort, the last tool we would use, and that is proactively shutting power off because of the significant and extreme elevated risk. Next page, please. So when we are establishing or deciding whether or not to use WSO or WSS, we go through a process of situational awareness. We use red flag warning data. We also use adjectives presented to us around the wildfire danger. So there is a red flag warning and a wildfire danger of high or above. And then we also look for high wind watch warnings in concert with wildfire danger of moderate above. So if there's both high wind watch and warnings and moderate or above wildfire danger, that would trigger it, as compared to just wildfire danger of high or above without the high wind watch and warnings. Next page, please. So when the criteria we use to for considering PSPS involves a lot of different things. So I don't plan to drain this slide, but I'll highlight a couple of things. It starts as a foundation, those things I just spoke about. Within our wildfire risk zones and within the state of Colorado, we've identified 3 zones, one high risk, one medium risk, and one low risk. So those top 2 tiers, which we call tier 2 and 3, high and medium, we're focused on our assets within those zones. And then superimposing on those assets, we look for red flag warnings, something called Wildland Fire Protection Index, and then wind gusts. We, specific to April 6th and 7th, we received forecasts of 100-mile-per-hour winds with low to very low fuel moisture. We had also ran models with a cutting-edge technology, a data model basically that models spread and risk of fire by a company called Silva, excuse me, which also provides us their own index of severity. And combining all of that is how we decide or not to use PSPS. Next page, please. So a little bit more on TechnoSilva. It assesses risk considering wind speeds, relative humidity, and fuel moisture, both live fuel moisture, which is determined based on satellite imagery and sampling done by the government, and dead fuel moisture, which is calculated based on humidity, temperature, dew point, and wind. In addition, it takes in all the other inputs that we've talked about already, as well as the location of our assets to help us determine an overall risk index of not only the likelihood of a fire starting, but as importantly, the impact of that fire starting. And I'll provide some specifics in just a second. This is rapidly evolved. This technology is rapidly evolving as we all together learn about the wildfire risk as it evolves. But very sophisticated modeling, taking into consideration multiple inputs to deliver to us an index that allows us to very precisely determine where the risk might be and whether or not PSPS is called for. Next page, please. So I'll spend just a minute explaining this page in a bit of detail. So on the far left is what's called a PSPS overview map. It is a map where TechnoSilva helps us identify geographically where the greatest risk is. So the darker red colors are where the greatest risk is. The blue colors on that map is where the least risk is. The black lines are our infrastructure, Xcel Energy's infrastructure that resides within the highest risk zones. So this helps us identify where the risk exists, as well as where our assets are, and allows us to make determinations around WSO and PSPS. What we did in advance of April 6th and 7th is we ran multiple simulations of specific locations within the red zones on our asset base. So the black lines basically, to determine what would be the impact if an ignition occurred. And what you see in the middle graphic is the impact of 3 very specific locations. And on the far right is a table identifying the specific impacts, acres burned, cumulative acres burned, buildings damaged, and population impacted hour by hour after an ignition, a potential ignition were to occur. So these 3 examples are 3 of 35 that we ran, and those simulations helped us determine that PSPS was indeed called for because of not only the risk of an ignition starting, but the impact of a fire if it were to start. And just to put a point of emphasis on this, the data shows that within 8 hours, an ignition at any one of these locations could reasonably be expected to burn thousands of acres, destroy between 100 and 700 buildings, and impact hundreds of individuals. Next page, please. A very reasonable question, which we got often, is why did my neighbor why was my neighbor not impacted by PSPS and I was? So let me start with the bottom right corner, the insert. What you're looking at in that insert, and this is in the Boulder area, and the black square in the middle of that insert is a substation where these 4 circuits start. So there's 4 circuits, 1 red, 1 purple, 1 yellow, and 1 blue. They all start from the same substation, but clearly they go in different directions and are of differing lengths. Now, if you go to the broader picture, the blow-up picture, you can see that the red circuit and the blue circuit, which were impacted by PSPS, literally run down adjacent streets to the yellow and the purple circuits. And I apologize, there is an error on the broader page. The purple in the bottom part of the page should be red, or excuse me, should be blue. So you can see that homes next to each other or on adjacent streets may have been impacted either side of the PSPS because of where the circuit ultimately went. The red and the blue circuits ultimately traveled into high risk zones. So we made the determination based on the Techno-Silva modeling to include those in the PSPS activity, whereas the yellow and the purple circuits did not travel into high risk zones. Next page, please. A second question we received that was quite often is, my circuit is underground. So why was I subject to PSPS? So this page actually is looking at the same 2 circuits from the previous page, but it's showing the circuits, the parts of the circuits that are overhead versus the parts of the circuits that are underground. So the orange and the red are the same circuit. The red part of that circuit is underground. The orange part is overhead. The blue and the green are the same circuit. The blue is underground. The green is overhead. So because they're connected electrically and because the overhead part of the circuits are so extensive and traveled into high risk zones, the entire circuit was impacted from our PSPS action. With that, Robert, I'll hand it back off to you to go through customer communications.
Thanks, Michael. Just for a time check, we got a couple more slides and then we're happy to take your questions. So next slide, please. So leading up to and during this event, we worked to reach out to our customers through a range of communication channels with multiple points and at multiple points in time. And the more detailed timeline was included with our responses to the questions that accompanied the SIM. But just as a high-level overview, these communications included multiple automated phone calls and emails to the customers that were going to be affected by PSPS, in addition to extensive news media outreach and coverage. And then we also use social media channels and website postings, and then messaging on our customer service phone lines. We started these customer communications on Friday, April 5th, as we were determining that a PSPS may be needed starting the following day. And it's important to recognize, obviously, that weather conditions are dynamic and can change. So Friday, we saw that and began to communicate that there was potentially a need to execute a PSPS. With the weather and conditions forecasted at that point, we identified approximately 30,000 customers in the highest risk areas, and we notified them through outbound telephone calls and emails about the potential for a PSPS. The weather continued to evolve overnight, and as it did, more areas met our risk criteria for a PSPS, and so the footprint for the event was expanded to include more than 50,000 customers at that point. So that we followed that up with those customers that morning, Saturday morning, to let them know that we would, in fact, be moving forward with a PSPS beginning at 3 p.m. on Saturday. Once the high winds died down on Sunday, we continued our communications to customers to update them as to the start of power restoration work. We also shared the likelihood that some customers would have extended outages because of the extent of the damage from the windstorm and the need for our crews to patrol the entire length of that 680 miles that I identified earlier to ensure that it was, in fact, safe to restore service before actually doing so. So while we did, and although we know we did a significant outreach to our customers, we know that this is an area where we can improve the timeliness, the usefulness of that information that we share with our customers. We've gotten that feedback loud and clear. And I will talk a little bit more after Michael talks about the restoration process about our commitment to make these improvements. Michael?
Thank you, Robert. Next page, please. So in general, when we are restoring service in an escalated ops situation, we try to keep our customers in mind, and we try to take the action that will restore service to the most customers soonest. So we look at problems that are impacting the most customers and address those first. This one, we followed that same process, but it was a little different in the sense that we had to patrol much more of our system because of the significant wind as well as the proactive de-energization. So simply put, when there is a circuit 20 miles long with maybe has 6 or 7 different taps on it, we go and isolate all of those taps, those fingers off the main line, if you will. And then we start patrolling the main line circuit. And when that is deemed safe, we energize that main line circuit. And then we patrol each and every one of those 6 or 7 taps. And when those patrols are complete and it's been validated that there is no damage that we potentially could energize into a problem causing an ignition and a potential wildfire, we energize those taps. So we proactively staged, as Robert previously talked about, multiple hundreds of people to do those patrols as soon as it was safe to do those patrols when the winds died down. And then we patrolled them and re-energized customers as soon as we could validate that the parts of the system that were impacted were safe. One thing that the timeline of how customers were responded and restored to is on the far right of this page. One thing that we didn't anticipate is the addition of more than 200,000 customer outages that were not part of the PSPS. So even though we started our patrols and our restoration activity as soon as the winds died down, that was an unforeseen fact that we didn't necessarily project accurately. Robert, back to you.
Thanks, Michael. And next slide, please. So in this and in all things we do running our business, we're committed to continuous improvement. And here is no different. We're grateful to our customers and our communities and our other stakeholders for their patience and understanding as we took this new step to protect public safety. We learned a lot from this first PSPS, and we're committed to making those improvements as we continue to evolve the ways we work to mitigate wildfire risk, including PSPS as a tool of last resort. In the bigger picture, as I mentioned earlier, and as Chairman Blank noted, soon we will file with the PUC a new wildfire mitigation plan covering years 2025 through 2027. And there we will propose new and expanded wildfire mitigations like undergrounding of lines in high-risk areas and improved tools to enhance situational awareness, including wildfire cameras and more weather stations to monitor conditions. Importantly, we're also going to propose ways to make future wildfire safety settings and PSPS events less impactful to customers by targeting high-risk areas as narrowly as possible. So both within the proposed plan and in the shorter term, we know there are steps we can take to improve our customer communications and engagement ahead of and during a PSPS event so that customers and communities can better prepare and then know what to expect. This includes providing more advanced notice of a potential PSPS event when possible, and being as precise as possible about which customers will experience PSPS de-energizations. We heard very clearly from customers and communities that user-friendly maps of PSPS areas are valuable in preparing for the outages, and we're taking steps to improve that mapping. We are also currently working on a comprehensive effort to validate and enhance our lists of critical customer facilities, determining their backup generation capabilities and developing ways to better coordinate with them and provide them as much notice as possible of a possible PSPS event. We also know that some customers depend on electricity to power in-home medical equipment, and we expect to reach out to all of our customers this month to ask them to make us aware if they have such equipment so we can keep them informed of potential outages in the future. We will also be working to expand our partnerships with local offices of emergency management and the Red Cross for future extended outages, which may include standing up community resource centers for residents during longer duration outages. And then we're also looking at how we can implement battery programs for vulnerable customers, whether that's one that we devise or partnering with other entities that are already engaged in that activity to bolster their activities as well. Next slide, please. So while it's going to take time and investment for our PSPS program to fully mature, we know that there are steps that we can take right now toward a more optimized customer experience, including enhanced communications. So this slide is intended to illustrate potential best practices based upon processes from other utilities that have a longer history of executing PSPS events. And it can serve as a benchmark as we make our improvements to our meteorological, operational, and communication capabilities. The goal ultimately is to provide customers and communities with as much advance notice as possible before a PSPS event, and to keep them updated with clear information during and after as restoration begins and is underway. So I'm going to conclude here just by saying thank you again for the opportunity to be here and present the criteria that we used and how we expect to improve. We know that providing reliable service is at the core of everything that we do. And while that is the case, increasing risk of wildfires in Colorado does require us to evolve as how we operate. Keeping our customers and our community safe is a commitment that we will never waver on. And so while we expect to need more PSPS events to protect safety in the future, we are strongly focused on making them shorter and making short and long-term improvements to ensure that we're serving our customers the best way possible during these challenging conditions. With that, Michael and I stand ready to take your questions.
We appreciate the thoughtful presentation and the characterization of the events and the acknowledgement as we learned from this first shutoff program that there's lots to learn and that we can collectively do better. So I'll start with you, Commissioner Plant, if you want to ask one question, and then we'll just go commissioner by commissioner, asking one question and do what my son calls a snake draft and keep going till about 10 a.m. and then we'll turn it over to our second panel. So you want to get us started, Commissioner Plant?
Your son calls it a what?
Snake draft, where you wrap around first, second, and then whoever
Okay.
goes third and fourth, and then like that.
All right.
Sorry.
Your new thing that you've learned for the day, Commissioner Plant.
Hopefully that's not all.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you very much for coming and giving this presentation. You know, to me, this is a part of climate adaptation. I think we probably are going to be seeing more of these type of events, you know, occurring, and you know, public safety is obviously the primary concern in these situations. And you know, I think that one of the things that certainly I've heard, and I know my colleagues have heard from the public, you know, while there's, you know, obviously, you know, frustration in, you know, having your power shut off, economic impacts to businesses, to communities in losing that power, the areas that I felt like we heard the most you know, dissatisfaction, obviously, around communication. I think you've acknowledged that there were some challenges there and ways that you can improve. Re-energization and the time that it takes to re-energize. And then, you know, as my colleagues and I have discussed briefly before, you know, what are some of the mitigating things we can try and do to mitigate the impacts for future PSPSs as they occur. So, I mean, I guess first, you know, just to ask one general question around the re-energization. I've been curious, you know, you talked a little bit about the mainline and tap system that you went through, where you would energize mainline and check each of the individual taps and things like that. Has the company looked at whether or not there are changes in the sort of topology of the system that could increase resiliency as well as ability to re-energize in a more I don't know, a quicker fashion, or be able to isolate areas of problem that would not impact as great of a population as this sort of main line feeder and tap system? Is that something that the company has looked at, or is that something that has some potential for examination?
Well, and
I'll
I'll
let
just,
Michael.
well, let me just add my question, and that is exactly on the same line. In talking to some of our colleagues in California, it sounded like they may have had automatic sensors that let you know whether a line is damaged so that you can turn it back on quicker. My understanding in Colorado is we had to have eyes on each of the segment before re-energizing. So in answering Commissioner Plant's question, if you can let me also know if that's an accurate characterization and if that's something we should invest in. So sorry for piggybacking on your question, but that was my
piggybacked on the snake. We've got a variety of
a variety of bad analogies.
I'm gonna let Michael take the bulk. I'll let Michael take the bulk of this, but I will say, you know, the speed at which we will be able to re-energize in some degree will depend upon how we can lessen the scope of it. And so I think both of those will work in tandem. And so we've described a little bit here, and we'll describe further in our PSPS plan how we intend to add more sectionalization devices, which should allow us to shrink the scope of it, which will necessarily mean that we will be able to re-energize more quickly. So fewer customers taken out on the front end, which will mean we'll have fewer lines to patrol on the back end. And so that's the first answer, and then I'll let maybe Michael supplement with an engineer's lens on this.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Robert, and thank you for the great questions. I'll answer it in like 4 parts. I'll just elaborate sort of on Robert's point that the more sectionalizing we have, the smaller the PSPS can be. So if you go back to the pictures of the circuits that I shared, If we had the right sectionalizing in place, we could have limited the customers impacted on those two circuits that were part of the PSPS to outside of the city limits, if you will. Those spaces that actually went in to the elevated risk zones as compared to being adjacent to those circuits that weren't in the elevated risk zones. The second path, I'd say, is getting more weather data, evolving the algorithms and, quite frankly, the AI used to help us be more surgical in where the elevated risk is on top of our assets is another spot that we can minimize the impact. On the restoration front, Chairman Blank, you're spot on. There are sensing devices out there that can help us speed up the restoration that in effect won't require eyes on the circuit. Those are relatively new, but they show a lot of promise. But the fourth item I'd talk about is better utilizing drones. Some people think of them as drone in a box, where they're pre-programmed with geospatial dimensions. And I'm going to way oversimplify here, but you basically, when the weather allows, the winds are died down, you can launch a drone in the box that actually does the visual inspection automatically without much human interaction and feeds a model that then can determine whether or not there's any damage on the system. So lots of opportunity to improve in short along those four paths.
Commissioner Goman.
Good morning. Thank you. My first question is really around the communications, looking at some of the information that you all filed, was it last week or so? There's an event, a document in there called Severe Weather, Fire Risk and Potential Proactive De-Energization Communications Guide. Sorry, that's what you all named it. It's a mouthful, but so I was curious, just kind of a mini series of questions on this that are all real short. What's kind of the vintage of this document? Is this something brand new, or is this something the company's had in place for some time?
So which document are you referring to, Commissioner? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I give you the name. Let me see. It had an attachment number. It is attachment G, called Attachment G, Communication Plan. The actual title of the document is Severe Weather, Fire Risk, and Potential Proactive De-Energization Communications Guide.
So I think that document is a combination of what we had planned to do and what we've learned in the moment and in the event. So it's the vintage of it, I think, is a combination of what we had planned to do and then as we actually executed what we've learned from that event.
Okay, so this isn't necessarily like a guide or policy that was in place at the time of the PSPS. I think that's what I'm trying to understand, the application of it.
Yeah, it would not have necessarily been officially in place. I think it was in the process of being developed, and then we've supplemented based upon what we've learned in the moments.
Okay, got it. And in looking kind of at the timeline as it relates to communications, I mean, it looks like there were a few discrete communications that went out on the Friday, but it looks to me like most of any of the communities that were impacted heard for the first time on Saturday morning. Is that a fair representation of when they would have heard for the first time?
Well, I'd say Friday evening, we did send out a communication to the approximately 30,000 customers that we had identified as potentially being in scope. And that communication indicated that there was a possibility of a PSPS event. And so we did the outbound calls and emails on Friday evening. And that's when we also updated our webpage. We did a news release at 7. We did some social media posts later that evening as well. And that was, again, to indicate the potential or the possibility of a PSPS. Saturday morning was when we made the definitive decision that we were, in fact, going to move forward with the PSPS. And overnight, that weather had changed. And so that 30,000 became approximately 50 some odd thousand. And that's when we sent out that additional communication, going from a potential PSPS event to a definitive, we're now actually going to execute a PSPS.
Okay, and the Friday evening communication was this out to customers, but no specific direct line of communication to any kind of the emergency preparedness or coordination within counties or cities or anything like that?
Well, the 630 outbound calls would have gone to 30,000 customers, whether those were residential or commercial, but the 30,000 customers that we had identified that were potentially in scope would have received that outbound email and outbound call.
I have a few more questions, but I wasn't quite following how the snake worked, but I'll turn it back to you, Chairman.
All right. So I guess my next question is on, it sounds like there were 17 wind events in the last 50 years that probably predominantly affect the same community. So it looks like, based on history, these communities are going to be facing something like this once every 3 years, and maybe it's worse with climate change. And I guess I'm just wondering if there's more we can be doing for these customers, you know, sort of rebates for backup power equipment for, you know, the people who have emergency equipment, or you know, I was also wondering if there was something like an insurance fund in other places that could help income qualified customers who experience, you know, potentially really problematic losses. So just curious if there's what best practice would entail for helping, you know, potentially a smaller number, a subset of your customers through continued events like this.
So I'll maybe start with by saying, while this is a tool that will remain in the toolbox, our first goal and priority will be to make it as infrequent and as small as possible through the mitigations that Michael was describing. So sectionalizing, you know, more weather data to allow us to be more precise and pinpoint the communities that would potentially experience it. So our first line of defense is to prevent it from happening in the first instance and to maintain it as a tool of last resort to the greatest extent possible. Second, in terms of our most vulnerable customers, we absolutely plan to develop some sort of battery program. That's something that we had already worked on. I will tell you that I did have the opportunity to listen to all 3 hours of the public comment, and think that there might be an opportunity to work with Julia Beam's organization and the Center for Inclusive Design at CU that's already got a battery program in place. And so I kind of alluded to this earlier, whether it's something that we would initiate or looking at opportunities to partner with organizations that are already doing that good work. That's something that we intend to explore, and we're not waiting for the wildfire mitigation plan filing to do that. So that's already underway. I think the other thing that we will explore and that will potentially be developed is the possibility of community resource centers. That's a best practice we've seen in other jurisdictions, whether that's some type of mobile community resource center that's available in the moment, or working with community partners to stand up hard-sided or, you know, brick and mortar community resource centers. That's something that we expect to explore as well. So I think my quick answer after that longer answer is that yes, we want to make sure that we're making this smaller and less frequent. And then for those customers that have particularly acute needs and durable medical equipment in particular, we want to make sure that we're able to provide some battery type of service for those customers as well.
I guess my only thought is maybe do it out of an existing DSM program, so we don't need maybe a full application, modify something that's going on. I guess I'll ask one more question, then go back to you, Commissioner Gilman, and then back to Commissioner Plant. But one thing that struck me was whether it would be worth putting a dedicated company person in the emergency management offices, and potentially our next speaker, our next panel can talk more about that. But it seemed like if there was a dedicated company person in critical places, it might have helped with the communication. I know some of that communication was flowing through us. So I just asked the company that, and then maybe Mr. Chart or Ms. Hodges can, or Mr. Whittington can talk to it on the next panel. But any thoughts on placing dedicated personnel during these events in key emergency management offices?
Yes and yes. I'll say yes, we've thought about it, and yes, we think it's a good idea. So, we have 64 counties in Colorado, and, I don't know if we'll have a dedicated person for each county, but having a single point of contact that's embedded in the emergency operations system, whether that's remotely or actually physically, I've seen it done in jurisdictions in different ways, is absolutely something that we want to work toward doing.
And in this case, it was maybe 5 or 6 counties,
well,
right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Let's snake back to you, Commissioner Goman, and then 2 questions to Commissioner Plant.
Well, ironically, I had 2 questions that I had on my list.
All right, go ahead.
In looking at that, so do you currently have like a consistent point of contact for kind of the emergency coordinators working within the communities that you serve, or that this is contemplated as a new thing?
I would contemplate it as an expansion of what we already have existing. So we have area managers that work throughout our service territory that are in contact with, whether it's elected officials, local governmental officials, or emergency personnel. We haven't specifically had, and well, let me say this, in other circumstances where there's an emergency, we would have very close contact with the emergency management personnel in the context of an event. So, but throughout non-emergency events and just throughout normal course of business, we have area managers that are dedicated to our specific communities.
Okay.
Right. Ask your other question or follow up on that one. Keep
Yeah.
going.
Well, it's more a follow up from before, because I'm trying to wrap my mind around kind of the what happened here and what I think you all view should happen in the future. So in your response, like the proactive email or phone call, which I think is like a pre-recorded call, is right. 30,000 people didn't get personal phone calls on Friday night. So,
we have the IVR. It's an interactive voice recording that gets sent out to those 30,000 or whatever the number of customers is that's identified.
So if you were to do it in the future, would you first reach out to the emergency coordinators within the communities before doing a public call? I mean, it strikes me, whether you got fire, hospitals, people with independent medical needs, whoever realizes this is going to be a big problem for them, I mean, they might go contact their jurisdiction as soon as they hear this to kind of figure out a plan. And it seems difficult if those folks maybe only just heard at the same exact timing and had no heads up about what might happen in their community. So I'm just trying to figure out the staging of this and why it wouldn't make sense to stage those folks first.
I think it does make sense, Commissioner Gilman. I think optimally, and I think this was on the slide before, we had 48 to 72 hour advance notice, and that would include police, fire, emergency personnel, critical facilities. That would absolutely be the optimal sequence. And so we would have, the potential for a PSPS 72, 48 hours ahead. As we get closer to the event, whether it's 24, 12 hours is when we say we're absolutely going to execute. And so that is the appropriate sequencing. And just let me just amend or clarify an earlier statement. We do have a communication plan in effect for emergency preparedness and emergency situations, generally speaking. And I did confirm that we did in fact reach out to some of our emergency managers prior to the public outreach call. I don't think it was, and those calls went out that Friday night, so it wasn't the 48 or 72-hour advance notice that I've just described as the optimal state. But we did have contact with our emergency managers prior to the public outreach call on Friday night.
Okay, I don't think that appears on the documents that have been provided, just as an FYI in my review, but I'll turn it over to Commissioner Plant.
Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. And just to kind of follow up along that line, you know, one of the things that I heard from people was, you know, they get, you know, outage texts or notifications, you know, when things happen outside of a, you know, a large PSPS like this, but then they were being contacted in some different way that for one reason or another didn't get through to them. Either it went to their junk email or, you know, it wasn't it seemed like it was a different process. And that they didn't understand how come they, you know, with this event, they weren't getting contacted in, you know, in the same way, or maybe, you know, that mode of contact was, you know, being filtered out in some other way, whether it's, you know, they look at their phone and they think it's junk, you know, phone, you know, message, or they you know, they don't recognize the number, so they don't answer whatever it might be. And I was wondering, I think in like a situation like this, it's one of those things where you can't really contact people too much. And did you do any sort of, I think you said that you contacted emergency services and things like that, but I know that, for example, Reverse 911 has gone through a whole process where they've missed people, you know, reevaluated their program, made modifications so that they could reach more people, done a lot of research around, you know, who they're contacting through what means and what's most effective. Were you able to do any sort of duplicative redundancy in communication using the existing Reverse 911 or emergency services communications pathways, or did you just focus on the company's mechanisms for outreach?
So let me answer what I think are maybe a couple of questions in there, because some customers you're saying didn't get notifications at all, or they got duplicate notifications. Just as a threshold matter, we will contact the customers using the means of communication that they've provided us. And so with emails, texting, phone numbers, our ability to reach out to them depends upon the accuracy of that information. And to that end, that's I alluded to this earlier, we'll be doing a mass communication to all of our customers in the middle of May or so, asking them to make sure that their contact information is fresh and updated and accurate, as well as pointing out to our customers of critical medical equipment to let us know if they do in fact have such medical equipment. I don't know that we've specifically talked about using the Reverse 911 system. I think that that's something that is absolutely worth exploring for this and for, you know, other kinds of emergencies. I know other states have used that, and so I think that's something we can absolutely explore, and that's a promising idea.
Thanks. And along similar lines of what Chairman Blank was talking about with respect to sort of mitigating impacts in the future with, you know, targeted investments, you talked about batteries for medically vulnerable people. You know, I know that this isn't, you know, certainly as serious, but it is, you know, does have serious implications. There were a number of, you know, businesses with an extended outage that, you know, had, you know, both financial impacts, but also, you know, I spoke with somebody who works at a pharmaceutical research firm, and they have, you know, a diesel backup generator, which, you know, they have to replenish the diesel periodically in order to maintain the ability for that backup generator to work, but weren't necessarily prepared for such a long outage. They managed to you know, keep keep enough power to maintain things, but they were at the risk of, losing 2 years of research on cancer medications, so it was like it has a real potential impact, for businesses outside of, simply the financial impact, which is also substantial. And I was wondering if the company has thought about having, maybe some sort of a microgrid program that could have a high reliability, tariff that basically these companies that maybe have these 9 nines of reliability requirement would be able to be isolated in a microgrid when these events happen, but also, of course, that would provide a resource to the system when those are not happening, so that we actually, there'd be a benefit, when there's not that system. But also, these companies would save the investment in these extensive backup systems if they knew that there was something that would be there at times when this kind of an event happened, and they would be able to be isolated and maintained.
Yes, a resiliency program for customers that are particularly usage sensitive, I think, is something worth exploring. And I'll also say, microgrids are something that are also worth exploring. Our I think immediate kind of goal will be to make sure that we're giving customers as much advance notice as possible of the fact of and the potential duration of an event. I think we also want to make sure that we understand whether it's a research company, a pharmaceutical research company, or a pharmacist, or a wastewater treatment facility, that we work with those organizations to also understand what their long-term needs, what they have in place existing, and what they might need to have going forward in the event of a longer-term outage. And so I think all of those things are on the table for exploration, Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. And one last thing, Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. I mean, as the chairman pointed out, I think, obviously we might expect these things to happen more because of climate change, but also because we're expanding, our communities are expanding more into that wildland interface and into areas of high wildfire, potential. And so I'm wondering, are there specific things that the company is thinking about that would be focused in these areas where we are, moving more into the wildland interface, and where that potential for these kind of wildfire conflicts may be increasing over time?
Wonderful question, Commissioner Plant. And what I would add to that is say that this is, you're describing climate-driven implications for the consequences of wildfire, people building more in the wildland urban interface. I think that's an opportunity for us to expand the discussion, because I think, as we all know, most wildfires are not started by utility equipment. And to the extent that this is a statewide and a nationwide problem, having conversations about zoning laws and having conversations about insurance and defensible space and other things that we all need to be doing to mitigate the risk of wildfire ignition is a conversation that probably transcends just the investor-owned utility space.
Appreciate that. I just did have one quick follow-up comment on that conversation, then we'll turn it over to our other panel. And that's I echo Commissioner Plant's thing about looking at that reverse 911 and the opportunities it could afford us. I know in Alberta this winter it was like -40, and they were like 30 or 60 minutes away from a load shedding event, and did a reverse 911 that got something like a 5 or 10% reduction in peak load in 15 minutes. And I know California did the same thing.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. So if you'd be willing to look into that and make sure it was available as a tool for us if we ever needed it. Hopefully we never will, but boy, you sure don't want to start shedding load when it's -40 out. So would you be willing to look into that, Mr. Kenny?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thanks again for the presentation, the willingness to come here today, and for being open to acknowledging what we did wrong and what we could collectively do better. So thank you. And if you could stay for the next piece, I think this may come back to you after the following panel. That'd be greatly appreciated. So with that, I'm just going to go down the agenda and start with you, Mr. Chard, Director of Office of Disaster Management for Boulder City and County.
Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. And I'd like to begin, and I'll be as brief as I can, but give the details I think are important. I'd like to begin with where we ended. So for us, this incident ended on Tuesday morning, and the way that we ended it was we had good operational integration and coordination with Xcel's operational team. We were getting information. We had excellent situational awareness on what parts of the grid were on or off and what were being repaired. And that led to us being able to lean into things and anticipate impacts and start to actually be ahead of the curve. So that's where we ended. And I say that because that's where I would have liked to have started, was with that sort of situational, operational understanding of what was going on. And on Friday night, we didn't have that. That's when we first, Commissioner Gilman was one of the emergency managers that was contacted late in the evening, or not late, but 7 o'clock the night. And it was pretty much a statement saying we're doing a public safety shutdown, and was the first we've heard of it. And then it was, we didn't know when, maybe noon, we'll know more in the morning, and didn't know where. So the actionable information was difficult. We did start integrating with our leadership teams and our public information groups, because we were told that there was communications going out to the Xcel customers. So the assumption was that they know where this is heading, or projecting where it's heading. They're handling the messaging, and we proceeded into Saturday. We immediately stood up a small group in our EOC on Saturday, just anticipating that there could be impacts. And it really was more about coordinating and getting this out to the broader community, and then also doing messaging support of the work that Xcel was doing with their customer base. We started to bring in first responder groups in the morning. We also brought together other communities for a briefing based on the actual information that we had. And then somewhere that mid to late morning, we finally found out it was going to be about 3 o'clock that there would be the public safety shutdown. And we just continued to support with the information that we had. Obviously, during that day, it's been reported in the media, we did have a problem with critical infrastructure, but the liaison work that Xcel had through that evening into the day, we were able to be able to call and communicate with folks, be able to resolve issues as they were starting to come up, which was very helpful. And that continued through Saturday. We also were starting to see impacts late in the day there with reports coming into 911 with folks that didn't, the durable medical equipment, things of that nature needing some support. So we created some programs for people to be able to get assistance, either if they had housing assistance needs or durable medical needs. And that program continued till the time that we shut down. And then getting into Sunday night is when we were able to actually get into cadence with Xcel around being able to operationally integrate closer and be able to actually see where outages were and the critical information around that, which was extremely helpful in us being able to adjust our operational tempo. And that continued through the next couple of days. And through Sunday into Monday, it was more the same. We had traffic impacts with, street lights being out. So we're coming up with plans to be able to either put signage up or be able to put law enforcement officials at those sites. We were monitoring other critical sectors in the community through our emergency support functions and our EOC during that time to support as best we could. And we came to the conclusion, like I said, on Tuesday morning. So to some of the questions I've heard, if I had to give comments on liaison versus integration, I think is two different things. So like I said, how we ended is where I wish we could have started. I was encouraging to see that we have that 3 or 4 day lead in. I think that is really critical to being able to effectively understand what's going to happen. And I think having actionable information, being part of the discussion of decisions related to what is the fire severity, what model are they using, what are they seeing from their side versus what we have on the ground. Being able to know where the outages are going to occur, being able to do those impact assessments locally, being able to help support the messaging that they're creating through our local relationships to be able to leverage at least some messaging and support where we can, is the difference between that integration of effort versus the liaison function that goes on. As far as the emergency notifications, Commissioner Plant, I think that's something that we'll have to look at, but part of that also comes from having good operational awareness of where the need is. If you look, some of the systems we have a bleed over effect. They won't necessarily go to intended areas. They can go broadly across the county. That can create an over alerting. Not that I agree that more alerting you can do or messaging is important, but also you don't want to create impacts on people that aren't impacted by the outage, because that could also have some economic impacts and other things too. So we'll be looking at that as we move forward and working with Xcel and seeing how we can best serve in that space. But the big part for us was really supporting the messaging effort that was going on with Xcel out to the community, and then really getting that operational coordination and view of where the outages are and what activity is going on and where the repairs are going on. Because that was the next piece of this, was not just the impacts caused from the outage, the duration of the time that was, the outage was occurring, that it impacts, especially in our school district. So there was some need for tighter coordination, and that was able to be achieved through that integration with their operations team on Sunday night. So in that, I'd like to just conclude, and if you have any questions, happy to answer.
I think we'll come back after everybody speaks, but my question to you is going to be, are you confident that the next time around we're going to end up where we were Tuesday, or whether we're going to be, back at the beginning? So, but let's keep going to Ms. Hodges from the Larimer County Emergency Management, and then Mr. Whittington from Jefferson County. So Ms. Hodges.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to this. I appreciate it. Our experience was a little bit different. We had, obviously we had the National Weather Service calls early on about the high wind event. Everybody knew about that. They knew about the high fire danger. We were also part of that red flag as well. But we did have 18 hours advance notice from Xcel, and we had a single point of contact with Xcel, which was excellent, I think. And so we got notified about, it was actually more than 18 hours, about 4:00 p.m. on Friday. We were notified that there were possibly going to be some preemptive power outages. So we activated our emergency operations center, and we started coordinating with our health and medical folks and our mass care folks, because mainly those were going to be the ones who were most impacted. We started coordinating with businesses, the food bank, restaurants, and care facilities that night to ensure that they understood that the power was going to possibly go out. And then we had our EOC activated throughout the weekend. So by the time the outage actually occurred, so I think Saturday morning, we got some updated maps. The maps were not accurate. So that was something that was causing confusion for us, is the one they changed, which I get that they changed, but then when we actually had outages, they weren't actually according to the map that we had. So that caused some concern for our folks. But I do want to let you guys know, though, that you cannot use the emergency notification system to let people know about a power outage. So for that question that you had asked about, I think Robert was tasked with trying to figure that out. I just checked with Lita and just to make sure, and they said that no, they cannot use the emergency notification system for power outages. So just so you guys know that. So for our lessons learned that we had, I think one is, relationships obviously with utility providers are essential, whether it's that liaison or integration. As long as we have that single point of contact, I think we're good. They can, as somebody that we can call and is going to answer the phone, or somebody that can call us, they don't necessarily have to be in the EOC. And an example of this is there was when the news release went out, it didn't include Larimer County, and we knew that we were part of this. So we called right away. They fixed it right away and got that news release settled. If we didn't have that point of contact, that might have been a little bit more of a long-term thing. I also think personal preparedness is essential. I do not want to set the expectation with our public that they will always know when a power outage occurs. So I think this public messaging is very important for this. We want to make sure that our public also knows that they need to be prepared for power outages that come. We will be having more of these. So I think a lot of what we need to do as emergency managers, and I think for Xcel, for your PIOs, is to ensure people understand that they also have a role in this, that, you know, it's not up to us to fix every problem that people have if they have the resources to fix it. Really, we should be worrying about those who do not have the resources and cannot help themselves. That really should be our role. We did have 14 fires that weekend due to power lines, not because of Xcel, but just throughout the county. We had 14 fires. Any one of those could have become a major wildfire. So we actually appreciate the fact that this was done in our community because the threat was so high that weekend. We know it causes cascading impacts. However, fires from power lines also cause cascading impacts that could be much worse. The other big thing that I think we all need to work on together is you start with the PSPS, but then you go into the incident and you now have power outages that are because of the incident itself. So there has to be this transition or public messaging or something, because people were then complaining that they didn't know. Well, you know, you're in the incident now, the power is going to go out. So we need to have a place where, like a stopping point where we say, as of this time, anybody, anywhere could have a power outages. You need to be prepared for it, right? Again, I don't want to set the expectation that people are always going to know. And then the same thing for restoration too. People were put out because they didn't have an exact time for restoration. We need to set that expectation that you're not going to know the time, because there's a lot of different factors that go into restoring the power. So I just think some of this is on us to do better with managing expectations and making sure that our messaging across all of us is the same. And then let me see. I think that's pretty much everything for us. I think we had a pretty good experience with this one. I know that we had a little bit more warning than our counterparts did, because I've talked to some other emergency managers. So I really appreciate the advanced notice. We did have the meeting with Dora. We had an after action review with Dora, and we did say that we would love to standardize this for, you know, all utilities, not just one utility, where there's advanced notification to emergency management, so that we can start working with our partners to ensure that we're ready to go when these preemptive power outages occur. So I think that's everything for me, and I'll take questions, I guess, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much for the perspective, Ms. Hodges. Greatly appreciated. Mr. Whittington.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to echo pretty much what Mike and Lori already summarized. Had a lot of the same issues. The one concern that we did have is we were not notified at all until about 2 hours before the press conference actually took place. And the only reason that Jeffco was actually notified was they wanted me to be part of the press conference as it was being held in Arvada, which I was happy for the notification to be part of the press conference, but gratefully declined, as we knew that we were going to be having some significant outages and impacts. A couple of the things that I just want to reemphasize, the early notification. It sounds like Lori had a drastic difference compared to me and even Mike. So standardizing that notification. We did already have an after action with the county and with the Xcel energy representative, and what we told them is most of us come out of the first response community. We're used to being toned out. We're used to being called out to an incident, getting maybe halfway down the block and being stood down. I would rather be notified and stood down than to be not notified at all. The re-energized maps and updates would be great, but also understanding the complexity that goes around the re-energizing of the lines. Emails after hours do not work. A lot of my municipalities, even some of my critical infrastructures, relayed information that they got emails at 11 o'clock at night to, you know, a generalized email box. There's got to be direct communication to the county emergency managers as a whole. Even though you guys may not be able to use the reverse 911 notification systems as a whole, there are options out there where you can create distribution lists where you are specifically sending messages to county emergency managers, city emergency managers, or opt-in options where you can send that information out to people that are wanting that opt-in information. Need of location before deployment. It would be great if we had an accurate map that identified where these PSPS identification locations would be, because then we can overlay that with our critical infrastructures, our healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities, and start getting them to ramp up their diesel, make sure their generators are working, make sure they've got adequate diesel on site, or that they even have diesel in their generators. As we start looking into colder weather and stuff like that, I heard somebody mention like -40 degrees, making sure maintenance on generators is critical. So anything that we can do would be great. We have been notified by Xcel Energy to give them a list of all of our critical infrastructures and known resources throughout the county. That's a little bit of a very broad statement. So we're looking to seek greater clarification of what those actually are. We do have a meeting with our area manager this week to kind of identify what Xcel Energy is looking for. I would love to have somebody sitting in the EOC at the ESF 12 desk, whether that is in person or virtually. We were unable to activate our EOC in person because we were part of the planned safety power shutoffs. So we were going to lose power to our emergency operations center. So we had to go to a remote activation level, which we did. A couple questions from the Xcel presentation that came up that I wanted to see if we could get clarification on this medical certification program that is being developed. Who is coordinating this? Where is this data being kept? And are they working with public health and emergency managers? Because we do carry a lot of information when it comes to access and functional needs. And also, would they be willing to share this data with us if they're getting it, so that we're not duplicating resources as they're conglomerating all this as well? The other piece that came out of it when it comes to situational awareness is we would love to have the ability to see, if possible, the dashboard that Xcel Energy uses. They're able to provide these really detailed maps in the presentation they just showed, but it'd be really nice to see if we could get that same integration through a common API platform or GIS platform filtered right into our emergency operations center so we can see what's going on. We're not going to release information without Xcel. It's their incident, it's their planned shutoff. We just want to be able to know, as Mike put it, leaning forward into the information. And then these community resource centers, I would love to get some, and it doesn't have to be today, but we can bring this up with our area manager. Who's funding this? If you guys are activating these community resource centers, the staffing, the services, the equipment, the bottles of water, the snacks, the food, the coffee, the power, the charging station, where is this funding mechanism coming from? Is this going to be an option through Xcel Energy? And then who is supporting this from Xcel Energy, or is this going to fall on emergency management to coordinate and plan and put together, and then ultimately be the fiscal responsibility of the county? So we've already witnessed both economic impacts, both from the public and the private sector, and now community resource centers that could put greater strain on us as a response agency to facilitate these. And then my last point is the attachment G that the commissioner spoke about, the severe weather, fire, and risk attachment G. If we could get a copy of that for emergency management so that we have an idea what the communication mechanisms are going to be, so that we can tie in directly with our public information officers to mirror or support that messaging instead of conflicting it. Thank you for the opportunity today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. And Ms. Swigger, I know we've heard from customers a couple weeks ago, but it sounded like you did a survey that was subsequent to that public hearing, and if you'd be willing to briefly share the results of that survey. I know today was mainly about the emergency management, but I think we could all benefit by hearing the results of the survey. So if you could briefly do it, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, commissioners. My name is Bettina Swigger, and I'm the CEO of Downtown Boulder Partnership. And I appreciate all of the information that I got to learn this morning. This has been extremely educational. And to Robert and Michael, thank you for putting together those very robust slides. I think I understand better now what happened last month. So thank you for that. I briefly just want to talk a little bit about the economic impact that the business community experienced. And while I work for Downtown Boulder Partnership, we worked with a variety of economic partners, with the Boulder Chamber, with Visit Boulder, and also with the City of Boulder to disseminate this survey. And we received about 106 responses. Most of them were from small businesses, although there were some larger ones as well. The businesses reported that they lost an estimated $1.3 to $1.4 million in revenue during the outage. They reported an estimated $240,000 in unpaid wages. I expect that's actually a little bit higher because when we sent out the survey, it was while the incident was still going. So if we had gotten the data a little bit later, people probably would have had a more accurate count of how much they were not able to pay out. And we also learned a lot about business interruption insurance. And we learned that an outage of more than 24 hours requires collective about $250,000 to return to normal business operations. So I know it's sometimes easy for us to think about the business community as being separate from the individual people, but one of the things that was really hard for our business community to absorb is that the businesses are run by people. So I appreciate all of the efforts for learning about how we can adapt in this time of climate change. Public safety is, of course, paramount, and we want to be a partner in communication along with all of your offices of emergency management. We have cell phone numbers for businesses, and we, like many of you have said, are really going to be focusing on preparedness and education for our businesses so that they don't have to deal with lost inventory, especially the restaurant community suffered from that, lost wages, and also just lost time, which is money in the business world.
Thank you so much for the sharing the survey results. Just one thing to clarify, when I was asking you, Mr. Kenny, about the reverse 911, I was talking more about a load shedding event beyond just the notification for a planned outage, which is the California and Alberta experience. So just wanted to clarify that the request may not be fully resolved.
Yeah,
for
in California, they used the Amber Alert system.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So we'll do some investigation.
I'd greatly appreciate it. I guess my question is for Mr. Chard or Mr. Whittington. It sounds like there were significant concerns in this prior event about the timing, the form of communication. You have unresolved questions that hopefully collectively will get answered. Are you confident going forward? You know, like I said, we're gonna start where we were on Tuesday. And what should we be doing to help make sure that's the case? So Mr. Chard, Mr. Whittington.
Nate, would you like to go first this time?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I think we have a better opportunity now than we did last time. The communication with the area manager has significantly increased, and I think we eliminated some of the lines of confusion that we originally started with. I also think there's an opportunity, between what we found with the after action report, and then seeing the slides that, Xcel had looked at going into this 3 days before they actually initiated it. And there was some confusion and some questions from, the area manager in regards to when did we even want to be notified, and how do we want to be notified? So I think we flushed a lot of that information out. As I mentioned earlier, I would have liked to have been notified the Wednesday before they actually did this. Even if they didn't, have 100% certainty that they were going to initiate the PSPS. It allows us to lean forward and not get caught on our heels. So my hope is that between the questions that we still have lingering and the lessons we learned, I don't know if we'll be to Mike Chard's Sunday level, but maybe we can be to a solid Saturday afternoon is kind of where I think we're going to be. Mike?
Mr. Chard.
Yeah, I think the criticism part, or critical feedback, I don't want to say criticism, critical feedback part of this is that we're building the plane as we're flying now, as opposed to hearing about the public. If we would have known about this 3 months, 4 months, 5 months prior, there'd been more of an engagement opportunity to talk about like the relationship building Lori's talking about. We do have relationships with Xcel. We've had them on disasters, but specifically to this type of event or incident, it was an unknown. So there became a lot of unpredictability around it. So I'd like to see a shift to a predictable environment where we're looking at forecasts, we're looking at the progression of that forecast and how it's going to lead to the actions taken by Xcel. It's going to then, if the action is determined that we're going into this, then we have location, we have time that it's happening, and we're able to then cross-lay that over our knowledge and local relationships to leverage that to where we're able to assist in the messaging and help tilt the community. And then also know, now that we're out of the threat period, how do we turn this on? Because I think a lot of people had, it's going to be over by 12, will be done by 7 that night, and everything's going to be reset. So just having less unpredictability. So to your question, sir, about if it happens today, I believe there's a willingness to be better on all fronts of this. I haven't seen the plan. Like I said, to highlight a little deeper down into that, where we ended for Boulder, we had probably the biggest hit. Maybe Nate was close by, but having the ability to meet with their ops team every 4 hours. That's how it went. It went, the operations team met with their leadership team, and then they scheduled a meeting with my group. And we were able then to see in that 4-hour period, okay, where are you? What are you doing? How are you doing it? And then sharing the information, seeing the actual outage map of where things are down still, where work is occurring, was extremely valuable in being able to understand what is happening and be able to, create response plans, support networks, information out to the community or to other sectors that we have interfaces with. So getting to that is where I'd like us to be. I don't believe we're necessarily there yet, that I could put a finger on it and say for sure. I believe there's a lot of intent what I'm hearing to be there. I like seeing the things like 4 days prior, but still this piece, and this is where I think I've got it. I'd like to know I have it though, is that if it happens again and we get in this 4 days out, at some point we're going operational, I'm going to have exactly the things that I had on Sunday night into the demobilization of this incident. I want that going into the operational side of this on the first day of activity. And that's where, if there's anything the commission can do and working with Xcel, and there's more work to be done, we're committed to being in that space, but that's where I still have some unpredictability.
I'll turn it back to Mr. Whittington, and then Mr. Kenny and Mr. Lamb, if you could be prepared to respond to that before we break. But let's keep it with this panel, and then at the end I'll ask you to respond to that request. Mr. Whittington.
Yeah, just to follow up real fast on Chart's comment about the operational coordination beforehand. I'm just like with any National Weather Service call, we get warnings, we get calls from the National Weather Service. So one of the takeaways might be the availability to have a coordination call with any of the utility companies when they're even starting to think about this, even before, just, hey, heads up, we're looking at potentially having this. Here's potential areas we're looking at, just like we do with the National Weather Service. When we've got this severe wind event, as Lori alluded to, we had coordination calls with them days before this event took place. So taking that same concept, that same idea, would allow for us then to, move forward and lean forward and start preparing.
Commissioner Gilman, questions to the panel?
Yeah. Just trying to think in terms of looking most critically at kind of vulnerable independent customer individuals as well as kind of critical infrastructure within the communities, whether that be the actual emergency response buildings, standing up some sort of community center, schools, whatever it is for that certain time. How do we coordinate better? Like, is there a good sharing of information between and within you all and Xcel on where these facilities are and what their critical needs are, where these customers are and what their critical needs are. And if, it sounds like public service is going to do an effort to update customer information, which would include kind of critical individual customer needs, how can that be better integrated with you all, as I think one of you brought up, as we move forward to make sure this is like a coordinated effort to understand where these critical needs exist and how to best kind of keep track of that moving forward. And there might be different courses as far as backup or whatever happens, but just in the intelligence of where they are located and what the needs are. Just curious on like, what do we need to ensure that coordination goes better in the future?
Ms. Hodges, you want to start?
Well, yeah, and I want to add to that, one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think it's a place where we could really collaborate is, I've been told Xcel has lists of people who are energy dependent or oxygen dependent, anybody who has medical needs that are specific to energy. We have those lists as well. So if there's a way to collaborate on that, because the lists probably don't match up and Xcel might have better data than we have. If there's a way that we can match that up so that then our public health and medical folks can reach out to those people and see if there's a need or if they're taken care of, that would be excellent for us. So just to kind of tie on to that, I think that's a collaboration that we could definitely expand upon that would help emergency managers.
Mr. Chard, Mr. Whittington.
Mike, you want to go?
You were getting ready to go. Go ahead.
All right. I think that, the coordination there revolves around the EOC function. We bring in in our world, the emergency support function 8, which is public health and medical. We bring in the mass care folks that have, the jurisdictional capability and authority to do such things. But we had no idea of where the impacts were actually going to be. So having that liaison in the EOC, both in person or virtually, I understand there's 64 counties, there's limited finite resources with Xcel. But again, Mike had a 4-hour operational coordination call. We did not. So I think standardization of a rhythm, a cadence of information would be great, where you're bringing Boulder, Larimer, Jeffco all to the table with one conversation. Sharing of the GIS data, as Lori mentioned too, but also that person in the EOC or virtually attending the EOC, we would be able to get those calls that newborn preemie baby that went home that's on oxygen is not going to be on that medical necessity list that Xcel Energy keeps because they just went home that day. So we're able to do the just-in-time care and information sharing, but then we're bringing in the historical data that both OEM and Xcel Energy has compiled over the years. So I think that centralized person, that ESF 12, Emergency Support Function 12, has got to be built within Xcel Energy and expanded out to support the counties during this type of incident, both pre-planning, response, and recovery through the entire event.
Mr. Chard.
I think, Commissioners, just to highlight the importance of having accurate real-time information helps out. The way I can speak for Boulder County, it's going to look different in every county that Xcel has to go into with this effort. It could, because of different capabilities at different levels. Once we were able to start seeing outage maps, I was able to bring that back into my impact assessment team, and they were able to draw polygons or shapes on our map that has demographic information that we've developed over the years. And that was helpful because they were able to look at how many seniors we had, people that might be on some sort of medical issue that's in our information database. Could also get the numbers of people. And that kind of information then helps us kind of lean forward into, do we need to open a shelter? We were having those discussions. We were talking to our food banks. We found out some of them were in power outages, so they were not able to operate. So, these were the things that having that information and that geospatial and temporal knowledge helps a lot with being able to do that impact assessment, which lets us push into those spaces you're talking about the needs of the vulnerable and the community needs about sheltering, and then being able to create programs or services. And then more importantly, also looking at, this thing was kind of bouncing between it had pockets of where things would get really intense. I know the business community was really heavily impacted, but you had 911 getting needs, oh, this person called up, they're now having problem with oxygen. That's who they call. They call 911. So that's our first intake point. So we're able to get with all our first responders, and then also working with our, like Nate was talking about, our public health officials that are monitoring the healthcare system, our mass care folks who work with all the housing authorities and know where people that have assistance needs exist. It just kind of helps us then resource that. Once again, it's getting that information on the lead end, and it narrows down sort of the space of unpredictability or that blind spot that we have, and lets us really start to kind of assess that and then figure out how we're going to support that using existing plans, or we have to create other capabilities based on the needs that we're starting to experience. So there's two pieces to this. There are the things we plan for. We have good planning assumptions around. We have systems ready to go, but there's also unpredictability in everything. And we also then have the ability with knowledge and information and mapping to then create new capabilities based on the impact driven needs of the incident. And as far as the Community Resource Center, that is a different flavor. That's kind of a disaster assistance center. So I'd like to talk to Robert more about, like, what does that look like? What's the intent and need? To also, pull apart some of the concerns that Nate brought up about who's going to resource that, how they're going to staff it, who pays for it, and those sort of things. So interested in that conversation moving forward.
And just one quick follow-up, like outside of individual customers with medical needs, looking at absolutely critical facilities like hospitals, water treatment, like necessary functions, do you all as the kind of municipalities understand where those facilities are, what sort of backup they have, how long they can run on backup, the flavor of their backup? Like, you already have this information available.
That'll depend on which community is impacted. I think for like Boulder, Larimer, Jeffco, we probably have more capacity than a lot of other places. So I would think that would be very situationally dependent.
Okay, just trying to figure out what you already know. Maybe public service does or doesn't know it. Is there a way to share this information to this so that they understand physically where a facility is located and how long, when the clock starts, how long you all are aware that facility has?
Yeah, and I'll say mostly, but we are updating that profile and looking at it from those things you're talking about, Commissioner, and we'll be very eager to share that with Xcel to get in those conversations of looking at outage areas. I heard Michael Lamb talking about, the sectionalization. It's one of the things that came up during this event for me was, if you say the risk is everywhere, that gets massive impacts. And then, you'll start looking at, we have high winds between September and into May. So, you look at the time of year, that could be anywhere from those months, depending on the right conditions. So the ability to sectionalize, have more fidelity within the system to be able to narrow down the impact areas, I think is going to be dramatically helpful. And looking at this as a longer term solution for mitigating the wildfire risk, but also minimizing the impacts on community and individuals.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant.
Thanks, and thanks to all of you for your comments. I've been learning a lot this morning. One quick question, Ms. Hodges, you said that the reverse 911 is not available. Do you know if that's due to a statutory restriction, policy, rule? What exactly is the limitation?
It's related to the laws around how you use emergency notifications. So as Nate had mentioned, we can do opt-in for people, and if they opt into this, then we can send them the notifications through our system. You just can't use the 911 emergency notification system for this. And the reason is because then you get to overwarning, where people get too many messages that are not emergency related, and then it starts to water down the emergency messages. So they have rules around how you can use that system and what types of event you can use. And it has to be immediate life safety. And I know that there could be an argument that this could be that. I'm just telling you that the law says that they can't use it for that specific purpose. So we do have some workarounds, though. Like, there are some other systems where we could use it, but it has to be an opt-in type scenario. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
but I can put you guys into contact with Lita. They're the experts on this, and they can give you whatever legal stuff you need to know about it.
That would be great, because I heard you mention laws and rules there. So
yeah. Yeah, and I can't tell you which ones they are. I just know that I asked them and they said no, we cannot do that.
Yeah,
so.
I appreciate that. One of the things that sort of occurs to me as I was listening to your experiences in this latest event is that this is kind of it's a new event, right? It's the first PSPS we've ever had, and I know that when I was serving on my volunteer fire department, we would go through incident training all the time. And there was a century of experience with wildfires that, continually built the layers of information and experience and ways in which you respond to different things and ways in which you plan for different events. And it seems to me as a new sort of an event here, we might benefit from having, incident planning and incident training around these types of events. So that, we can coordinate, how that communication is getting out to both your emergency offices, but also how we're communicating with the public and how we're, getting ready to prepare the public for what might happen, and recognizing that this is again a new thing. Being better prepared in the future, I think that would be a good way for us to go. And I was also thinking about when one was talking about the impacts. I know I heard from a number of restaurants and also grocery stores that part of the the impact of this specific event was because it happened on a weekend, right? And so your restaurants really stocked up for the weekend, because that's what most restaurants get their deliveries on Thursdays or Fridays, and so they're at their maximum amount of inventory as they go into the weekend. And then also, as I think someone pointed out, emails on the weekend are not necessarily as effective as they might be during the week. And so, I think it would be helpful to identify, if this happened on a Monday versus on a Saturday, what are some of the different impacts and different outreach challenges and different populations that are impacted, because it seems like the nature of this and the timing of this really sort of drove a lot of the impact and a lot of the different challenges that we faced. I don't know if Ms. Frigger has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was an interesting situation here in Boulder as well, because we on the ground didn't see the high wind activity that maybe some of the outlying areas that were affecting the feeder and the downed power lines. So it felt almost arbitrary as to where, and I know that it was not, given the information that you shared. But it just really, it felt like it was kind of a nice weekend downtown. And so there were a lot of tourists who were visiting. They didn't really understand what was happening. And I think, it could have been a bigger challenge, especially if schools had been impacted for longer than they were. They had enough time to prepare. But I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, and it certainly is worth considering for the future.
Anybody else? Mr. Chard, Mr. Winningham, Ms. Hodges?
I'd just like to hit back on not to be in conflict with Lori's statement, but to just refine it a little bit so it's not so binary for me. LEDA is a governing body up in Larimer, but we have BRETSA, which is Boulder, and I agree that there may be some pieces around that. But I also want to say there's some flexibility there too. Messaging was the primary effort to trying to communicate, and we try not to use our alerting systems, especially that are used for life imminent situations, for messaging platforms. We like to rely on other ways to do that. But to, like Lori said, if there's something you can say is becoming an exigent nature to it or a life safety issue, then having or leveraging those systems could be considered. But to do that, you have to have, and once again, it's falling back on good information. You can't just blast it out everywhere, because some of these will go all over. So the content has to be able to at least give some information around where the impact is occurring, for how long, protective actions, things like that. And if we can hit those sort of pieces, then I think there's an opportunity to engage that discussion in a more meaningful way to see if there's a better way that we can elevate people's preparedness or understanding about something happening. So that's where I sit from our perspective in Boulder. Would continue to look at that, but it has to hit some thresholds in order for that, I think, to be an option, and has to be able to have those components of good information and be able to give location, which I think we didn't have that sort of ability to get to that level till days into it. So something to maybe that could be looked at. So that's all I have on that on that. Hope that answers your question, or Commissioner Plant, a little bit differently.
Thank you. I'll turn it to you, Ms. Hodges, and then I'll ask the company to just generally respond to what they heard today. But Ms. Hodges?
Yeah, I would just ask, I guess, that the main thing is consistency across counties. In whatever rules come out of this, or whatever process comes out of this, because we're not just talking about Xcel. We have multiple energy companies in our county. And so if we're having different rules for different companies and different rules for different types of events, we're not going to be able to have a system that really works. So I would just ask that whatever comes of this, or whatever comes out of Dora's meetings that they've been having with emergency management, that it's consistent across the board. And then also to consider capacity. Like I mentioned, some counties have a lot more capacity than other counties as far as emergency management. So it needs to be flexible and adaptable for that as well.
Greatly appreciate the constructive, thoughtful, and diverse comments of the counties. Mr. Kenny, Mr. Lamb, I think we've heard 8 or 10 or 12 different questions, ideas, concerns, recommendations for the path forward as we collectively try and frame these issues, for improvement next time, and for the wildfire mitigation plan application. Just wondering if you have any reactions to what you've heard, whether it's on track, off track, whether it needs clarification, whether you state it differently, disagree. Just would welcome any guidance you can provide us as we try and collectively move forward towards best practice. Mr. Kenny?
I took lots of notes. I don't hear anything with which I fundamentally disagree. And I'll say at a very high level, I think most everything we heard falls into the category of the need for earlier communication, more frequent communication, more accurate communication, whether that's in words or in mapping or
and more consistent
and more consistent communication. Yes. And so some differences between how we may have communicated with Lori versus with Nate versus with Mike. I think that's where that consistency can come in. So to say at a very high level, nothing that I've heard, I think I can't say I fundamentally disagree with anything. I think there are some things that we want to have further dialogue on, that we have access to information about our customers. For us to be able to share that, we would need customer consent, and so there's some customer privacy issues there that we would want to make sure we understand what our constraints are or what our opportunities are there. We have the medical certification program that I think somebody mentioned. I don't know if it was Mike or Nate or Lori, and that medical certification program is used for a different purpose. But we do want to make that communication to our customers to let them know if they have durable medical equipment, if they're an AFN customer, to let us know that. If there's an opportunity to cross-check lists to make sure that we have as comprehensive as possible a list of critical customers, that's something I think we want to explore as well. I think Nate went through a list of items with respect to community resource centers, what those would look like, how they would be paid for. I think those are all still questions to be determined. And I would also hazard a guess that would depend upon the community in which we find ourselves standing those up, because I would imagine the nature of the community resource center might differ from county to county depending upon what buildings might or might not be available. And so I think that's an opportunity for more dialogue. I'll just say at a very high level, I think that we acknowledge and recognize that all the things that you all are saying are things that we've identified as well that are opportunities to improve. And I did want this presentation and this dialogue to give Mike, Nate, Lori, the commissioners, and anybody else that's listening confidence that we're self-aware and we hear you, and we're taking steps to identify those areas for improvement and are actively working those areas of improvement in advance of filing the plan, but also we're not waiting for the plan. Bettina too, I meant to mention you too, Bettina, sorry. But I want you to come away with confidence that we hear you, we know where we have opportunities to improve. We don't want to make those improvements in a vacuum, and look forward to working with all of you going forward.
Well, appreciate that response. And it sounds like even during the event in real time, there was substantial improvement from Friday to Monday, as Mr. Chard characterized. So glad to hear that that's ongoing and continuing. In our last 5 minutes, I'll just ask Director White, Mr. Gomez, Mr. Duran, anything else you'd like to ask or see while we're all together here?
Chairman, this is
Gomez.
Larry Duran.
Oh.
Quick question for you for Michael Lamb specifically. I know that Techno Silva played a big role with respect to the PSPS activation within the company. How widespread is the use and reliance of that in the industry? Is it just exclusive to Xcel, or is that something we can see within other companies?
It's got a limited exposure to the industry. It follows what you'd think is probably a common process. It started in California and is evolving beyond California, but it is not widely used throughout the industry. We're at the beginning of the use of tools like it. So one comment to Lori's comment about other utilities, I'm not aware of any other utility in Colorado that has that capability.
Oh, thank you.
Director White, Mr. Gomez, any final thoughts to keep us on track?
Just from my end, Rebecca White, I really appreciate the dialogue today and the information provided by the company, and many thanks to our emergency responders. I'm always so impressed with the work you all do, and appreciate you came forward as you always do when incidents happen. So thank you for the time today, and look forward to further discussions and next steps.
Mr. Gomez?
And just I'd also like to add my thanks to Mr. Kenny and Mr. Lamb for participating today, as well as the local government officials. It was a very informative meeting, I think, and I think sets the foundation as we move forward to the wildfire mitigation plan filing, and looking forward to that, and incorporating to the extent possible anything learned today into that proceeding as well. So thank you very much.
Well, I'll just echo that and say, thought it was a really constructive dialogue. I learned a ton, and appreciate the opportunity to hear from everybody, and we'll be back quickly with next steps. Commissioner Plant, Commissioner Gilman, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, nothing. Just to share that. Thank you, and appreciate the conversation and communication. So I learned a lot. Thanks,
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, thanks to each of you, and of course thanks to your teams and the emergency responders who really kept things moving in not ideal circumstances that weekend, for sure. And I know this, sometimes this process is tedious to sit and armchair quarterback everything that happened. But I think we all know this won't be the last high wind event. It wasn't the first. And so really, I think our job in partnering with all of you is to make sure that in the future things happen in the most ideal way possible, given the circumstances. And so learning from this and picking apart what could have been better, how we might do it next time, and getting enough detail on the bones of that to make sure that we have a way to see through that it is happening is important to ensure, that we provide the best service going forward. So thank you all for your role in that, and thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, really, thanks, Mr. Kenny, Mr. Lamb. Thanks for showing up. Mr. Chard, Mr. Whittington, Ms. Hodges, thanks for your service. Thank you, Ms. Swigert. And unless anybody else has anything else, I think we're at 11, so we'll adjourn. Thank you all. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.